Recording is on.
Hello everyone. Today is Sunday, April the 17th. This is the meeting number 105. I posted on Reddit some suggestions for the topics today, but there can be plenty of other topics because there's no shortage of subjects to talk about at the moment between us. Just to start, I wanted to say that I have given a personal contact, my daughter actually, to one of the Extinctionati, actually two, because that's going to be an Irish one too. So in case I disappear or I'm offline or something happens to me, that somebody of the group can get in touch with my daughter, for example. That's what I taken. So I was thinking that I hope everybody has one person or two in the Extinctionati that they know enough to give them maybe one contact. So if ever one of us is not around for a long time and we want to have news, we can have a contact, that way. Gary, do you want to say anything now before, or anyone else before we I don't know what we start with?
Yeah, I was looking at your suggestion for the topic. I didn't reread it fully. You're basically on the topic of truth and specifically regarding that R.D. Laing video, although not necessary to watch it. Yeah, I had some thoughts about that actually, because in that video he described a couple of patients of his who had some rather amazing secrets that they were keeping from their families. In one case, there was a woman who had two children by somebody other than her husband, and never told her children or her husband about it at all. But the concealed the information totally. And then the other example was a similar case in which case the woman did tell the child and husband that it was somebody else's child, and he was just discussing the sort of what the consequences were. That obviously they could be different in different circumstances. But I was actually wondering, Sophie, transferring the whole discussion about truth over into the situation globally, socially, that we're in now, where we're not being told the truth about a lot of things, and a lot of people are waking up to this for the first time in a serious way. Certainly a lot of people involved with awareness of climate change or doomerism and this kind of thing. We've become very accustomed to sifting through the mainstream narrative to try and work out what the story really is instead of what we're really being told. But the I think it's probably going to be necessary to distinguish between uh, lying deliberately and propaganda and simply not telling the complete truth, but only telling part of it, or misrepresenting it or manipulating it. Um, in a way, thinking back to R.D. Laing and about those women who didn't tell their family what had really happened, in a way they weren't really lying. They just weren't telling something. They were just concealing something. So I suppose there's this kind of collection of things, um, concealment, lying, partial truths, uh, leading information, misinformation, all these terms that they're using now, malinformation. And then, what about the question of censorship where nobody's telling a lie, they're just hiding the truth, or maybe they're hiding a conspiracy theory, and the conspiracy theory might not be a conspiracy theory. I mean, you've got to consider whether a conspiracy theory can qualify as a lie or not, depending on whether it turns out to be valid. Um, so I think there's a question about the uh, exactly what we mean by the truth when we say we want it, or when we say it's not there, or when we say someone's lying. Um, and there was a second aspect that came to mind because, Sophie, I don't know if you remember, we had a conversation on the topic of revelation. It, not so much in the sense of biblical revelation, but how the uh, current situation with the disease that's spreading across the planet, um, and how it has led to various things being revealed, all sorts of different things at different levels. Uh, I mean, at one level, things that are in the news, such as, oh, this disease escaped from a certain laboratory, and then, oh no, it didn't. No, it didn't. We hush that up. And then later on, it became revealed just slowly. More and more information came out until the narrative was completely the opposite of what it was originally. But I was thinking of um, revelation at all sorts of those levels because people have been put in awkward circumstances, and we were talking about in England where due to the difference in climate, weather. Uh, uh, the ground level in some places, so the ground had dried up, and the surface level of the ground had sunk a little bit, and revealed the outline of ancient, like of archaeological sites that previously weren't known. And so things were being revealed physically. And then there was, I think the case I told you about, it's only a small matter, but it gives you an impression. A fellow who escaped from prison here, was a story in the newspaper, and I can't remember the details now, but it went something like that. He'd escaped 20 years ago, or some enormous, a long time ago, and never been caught, and had been living a very successful life under the radar, being an odd jobsman and gardening and doing household maintenance for people, and was living quite a reasonable existence until the disease came, and he couldn't get any work anymore, and he ended up uh, being homeless, and eventually had to turn himself into the police because he had no money and nowhere to live, and his only other option was to go back to prison. And it was interesting how the disease had put him into a circumstance that revealed something that was hidden in his life. So you're getting these uncoverings of things going on at all different levels. Um, and just finally, so that I don't rave on for too long, The one of the things that R.D. Laing talked about was this question, discussing, for instance, that family where the husband and wife and the children the children, or there might have been a couple of children in the example, because that woman wasn't telling the truth about whose children it was, that the whole family was actually living in a lie that they didn't realize, but they didn't realize they were living in a lie. Um, and you look at our social situation now, that we've got sort of dominant narratives in the society that we live in, and a lot of them are starting to crumble at the moment, and exposing the fact that that the society we live in has been maintaining certain illusions about the true nature of itself, and we've been living in a lie inside this society we're living in, and this is the truth is in some ways is starting to come out, and so we've got this question both of truth telling and lying and what that really is, and the question of living in a lie and then beginning to emerge from it, um, and also the question of, I guess, too, is regarding revelation, that as these lies or concealments begin to crumble, um, a whole different world or a whole different way of looking at things appears, is revealed. So I'll shut up for a minute if anyone wants to come in on that.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, I remember very well what he says in that video I posted, but there is much more in his work on truth and language and the effect of lies on people, and you can transpose it to society. I think very easily you can jump to that. Like, for example, once in the example that you talk about, there was one of the children, I think, of the family. Stop me if I'm wrong, but developed schizophrenia, and that's how he got in touch with that family and that story. And the moment where the truth was revealed, the schizophrenia disappeared.
Yeah, that was a very. I left that part of it out just to
That's
simplify it,
very
but yeah, it was
interesting.
very interesting.
Yeah, because in
Yeah.
another in a part of his in another part of his book that I was rereading this week, I think it's in chapter 3. I'll post the link. Um, he talks about, like Lord Hugh used to, about the role of schizophrenia in revealing as a revelation of truth, as a vision. It's extremely interesting. The narrative and the, how Lord Hugh used to say that you can't separate the language and the alien cortex. The
Mm.
formation, the way it's been elaborated, the way it's evolved in our brain is totally connected to our left brain. And I think that when there is lies, or when there is disguising of truth or silence or omission, like you say, DB, um, there is an enormous part of our brain that takes over, and it can manifest in various, what we call mental disease, which is, in my opinion, absolutely not. It's just a non-adaptation to a sick system that's forcing you to take lies as truth. What do you think of that?
Yeah, there's a lot in what you're saying there. I just the first thing about that boy, I'll just tell the story that Sophie's referring to is in the one of the examples that Lang gave. Um, the husband and wife, they had a teenage son who was he was schizophrenic, and just you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, Sophie. I think he had the schizophrenia was focusing on the fact that he thought he wasn't uh, uh, his father's real son, and of course the mother, that was actually the truth, but the mother had concealed this and not told anyone. Um, and she was still intending to conceal this fact because uh, she felt that he was probably going to be schizophrenic anyway, whether she told him the truth or not. But in the end, she did reveal the truth, and the son's schizophrenia disappeared. In which case, telling the truth was a healing process. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. Um, and the only other thing was just what you said there about language and the alien cortex. That My impression has always been that um, you could almost say that language, the alien cortex, is language. Um, the whole little collection of language, thought and language that is what it is what the alien cortex is. Um, so yeah, I'll just leave it at that just for the moment. Um,
Oh yeah, I think that's exactly right, Gary, because if you think about it, the alien cortex has, built this culture pretty much out of language, and it's just like scaffolding on top of nature, and it's superfluous
mm,
nature. And then, unfortunately, with civilization, the scaffolding, this map, is now destroying and burning up the terrain, the real terrain that is.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, actually, what you reminded me of is something. Uh, it's a little bit off topic, but there's something in it. Um, Sometimes when you're looking at a particular topic, you have to look a little bit outside of it to make sense. You know what you're just saying that to most people, thought and the burning up of the terrain literally don't seem to be connected, but they are. And I was thinking of that video of Sabina Hossenfelder, the one on green nuclear power that was posted just recently. And she was sort of describing how nuclear power stations, or making a case that they're probably greener than people think they are. Uh, but what and I thought to myself, well, look, it's a bit like transgender issues and veganism, as you can argue with people about it until you're black in the face, and nobody will ever agree, and everybody's got the perfect counter argument, and that kind of doesn't matter what you say, somebody's got a counter argument that's just perfect. Um, but in the case of the nuclear thing, that you can just leave the nuclear argument alone and don't even bother trying to discuss it with anyone about whether it's
Well,
good, bad, or
I
indifferent.
I have
Uh,
a
yeah,
with
go
the
on.
nuclear plan, or with the nuclear
Mm.
argument, you can settle it like this. Does the
Mm.
ecosystem benefit from a nuclear power plant? Fuck no.
Yeah, that's it. Well, it's basically what I was going to say, because you have to ask yourself, what is the end result of this nuclear power plant? It's the production of energy, and providing human beings with energy basically is providing them with the means to destroy everything and to over exploit, because it gives us so much, enhances our ability to act on the planet to such a degree. So the basic problem is the overuse of energy, probably more than where the energy is actually coming from itself. You've got certain number of people and they've only got their own strength. But then you get a certain number of people and you give them a nuclear power station and an oil well and all the rest of this kind of thing, and watch what they can do. Um, so it's kind of, just to bring it back to what you were saying about language, and that it kind of gives us a leverage to strategize and plan and invent things and do all this kind of rational stuff that leads to the domination of the physical environment, or the destruction of it at any rate.
Yeah, I think the battle there is to know when to exercise restraint over that. Yeah, that's the key, exercising
Yeah,
restraint over our ability to manipulate the world.
It's interesting you use that word because if you get a chance, did you see the video with Ian McGilchrist? And it was very interesting because he actually discussed that. I don't know if he actually used the word restraint, but he certainly was on in that general area. And he was saying, yeah, that what we do with what we do is take it too far. And it works for a while and gives us good results, but we keep going in the same direction when we ought to exercise some restraint and um, not keep pursuing a thing, assuming that more and more and more gives us more and more and more improvement. Because he said it doesn't. It reaches a point where it first you get no improvement, no further improvement, and then you get um, then it works in the opposite direction. It starts to defeat you. He was just giving an example, not so much environmentally, but in terms of bureaucracy and administration, where to get something done requires so much paperwork and sort of collateral stuff that the actual task that it was all about was completely forgotten and irrelevant and just became uh, uh, in other words, the main event had become the sideline, and all the administration and the collection of data and all the rest of it had become the dominant thing. So yeah, I mean restraint, and when you look at it, supposing we had sort of declared a stop to the Industrial Revolution at around about the time, you know, suppose when everybody had a nice shiny new black bicycle and said, okay, that's it, we'll stop there. I guess um, people are always going to want to know what comes next. Um,
Yeah,
I guess at the moment,
one of the things I love in that video that he said is he said that like the left brain is completely linear, and then like the right brain reminds you because right brain mental space is curved, and it like reminds the linear thinking left brain that space time is curved, mental space time is curved. I just love that. It explains so
yeah, that,
much.
that was a good term that he used there. He said, yes, remember that space is curved and this effort will come back at you. Yeah, that's right. That was a very good point.
I
That
haven't
was actually a really good discussion because he was being,
yeah.
sorry.
I haven't had time to listen to that video, and I make a point of listening to it today because I really
It was
like
particularly good.
advice. But may I mention just before you continue, Gary, about something that you wrote to me about the dollhouse? Can I read it? I have it here.
Oh, the dollhouse. Yeah, sorry.
Because
Yeah,
you,
go on.
you wrote to me. You said you were talking about language, and you said, I'm thinking of what we've done. It's like building a little dollhouse inside the house and calling it language and moving in to the dollhouse and taking it to be our real house and looking out the tiny windows, seeing a fragment of outside and trying to describe and understand the world from that limited perspective. And I thought that was a great image. I just wanted to add that to what you were saying.
It sounds better when you read it back. um, yeah, yeah. Because I think what was coming out of the discussion, the discussions about language, uh, was that it limits your limits of thought and your limits of we limit our we limit ourselves to the limits of language. Um, and I can't give a very sophisticated discussion about this at all, but I know that the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein went into this. It was a concern of his, actually. For anyone who really wants to go down that rabbit hole, there's, he was very much involved with the discussion of, that your world and what you can conceive and all the rest of it can only extend as far as your language. But of course, I guess he was talking from the point of view of somebody who was thoroughly embedded in their alien cortex. And, for people who are free of that or freer of that, they would probably argue with him that they've got a very expanded world by comparison to people who are living within their thoughts and conceptions all the time.
Can I just say that I don't know if this is something everybody has, but for me anyway, when I'm thinking, and I'm thinking creatively, or problem solving and stuff, then I think without language. And if someone was to knock on my door and ask about what I just thought, then I would have to translate it into language, not into English or Norwegian or Danish, but to language. So when I'm thinking, about the things that I do or work on, then it's just a wordless concept, like a cartoon image of a light bulb, like an ID, right? So you have this image, you have solved a little piece of it, of the problem, and you just have to verbalize it and make it into words afterwards, if you have to. Sometimes you can just go right into implementing your solution without turning it into words. So I don't know what that says about the way I think, the way I do the thinking process, compared to the alien cortex. I never really understood the alien
Yeah,
cortex things. Yeah.
I think especially for a kind of creativity that doesn't require words. But what I was thinking of while you were saying that was that, if you do that process, creative process or whatever you're doing, and then somebody comes and asks you about it, and you've got to put it into language. I don't know. I'm imagining that you'll probably find that the language doesn't adequately describe what you're doing, and you're aware of a chasm, a gap between language and what was going on, which is partly what I mean, that the sort of inadequacy of words to capture our reality properly or completely, or, we think we're capturing it all when we use words. But in that example, for instance, if you're describing your creativity, the words you're using, if you're telling somebody about it, probably aren't really capturing what you're doing.
Yeah, I just realized it's almost like the allegory of the cave, in Plato, right? So the words are sort of just like the shadows on the wall or something, but the real thing happened before the words. And so I can't imagine I'm the only one in the world thinking without words. It has to be more people than me.
Yeah, I think I've told everyone before, but yeah, I don't think in terms of words really at all. I literally have to sit there and actively process a sentence. Like, it doesn't just come to me. I have to sit there and manually put the words together. On the other hand, when I'm sitting there by myself, not actually talking to people, it's just images, really. I see images and stuff, and I think about animals and my immediate body sensations and stuff. That's it.
I was reading. I don't know how I think, because I never try to analyze. I'm very close to my physical sensations, so it would be more in terms of nearly smells and sensations of heat, and I don't know, of things, that waves that come through my body. And but I find it very easy to switch to the language after, very quick. So it goes back and forth between, I suppose, different parts of my brain, the way they connected. But I was, because we were talking about language, it came back to mind this week to look back on Lord Hugh's little, I think it's about 50 pages that he wrote on language. It was called Adam's Language. And I don't know how to post a PDF to Reddit, so I can send it by email if you want. Anybody wants to send me a message, I can send it by email. And he says in a part of it, he says that the alien cortex operates in both halves of the brain, but it is much more active in the left. And he said why the right brain appears more intuitive, creative, colorful, and artistic is because it has more of an ancient pre-alien cortex showing through, as it were, in the right hemisphere. So, and there's much more like that. Because I find it also, like you, Tostin, I found sometimes that the principle of the alien cortex, I need to revisit that a lot to try to get the concept right. And I think it's not so clear. And even Hugh says it's not so clear in that little essay. But it's quite an interesting one to read again. Very interesting. So anybody who wants me, I can email it. I have it on my laptop there with me.
Sophie, are you saying the alien, exactly what the alien cortex isn't clear? Is that what you meant there?
What
Sorry.
he's saying is that what Hugh is writing, he's saying that the alien cortex operates in both halves of the brain, but it is much
Yeah.
more active in the left brain hemisphere. Hence the popular notion that the left brain is rational, reductionist, analytical, and logical. And that why the right brain appears more intuitive, it's because it's more of our pre-alien cortex showing through. So there is much more in that little 50 pages description of Adam's language. It's a very rich. I don't know if many of you have read it, because I remember that he posted it and he sent it to some of us
He did.
a while ago, because he wanted to publish a book. He was writing a book about the layered brain, about all these things, and those were chapters he wanted to submit to all of us. I really hope that somehow we could get more of this stuff, if ever, but I don't know, that might be if ever we get back his
no, I did. I remember reading it, but it was quite a while ago.
But it's
really
good to
need to
revisit
reread it.
because the language thing, I often need to get to read something to clarify a bit my mind. I'm a bit like that, because otherwise the concepts are get a bit like but I understand exactly where we are with language, and I know exactly the limitations of language, because I know what the communication can be with babies and animals. I know that there's much more going on than what we the words we use, as UDB, totally open to what comes through channels that we absolutely cannot define logically.
Yeah, I think sometimes there was a bit of confusion because Hugh Hugh sort of seemed to think that the alien cortex was physically a physical section of the neocortex, I guess, of the brain. I mean, I can't argue. I really don't know, but I felt that it was more what I said earlier, that it simply is what results from language and thought. Just personally, I've never seen it as being a particular physical part of the brain. It's just the outcome of our ability to use language, and especially at whatever stage when we started to be able to talk to ourselves, to actually, think, have a voice inside your head, so to speak. That's, because it was when we would have experienced a division in ourselves. You would have a feeling of yourself as being yourself, and then you would have this ability to have this thing talking inside your head, and so you could see that, I'm just imagining that early humans might have experienced that as being quite perplexing. That, I'm here, then how come I can hear this going on? I'm not opening my mouth, I'm not talking to anybody else, and yet stuff is occurring to me. I don't know if we really need, it's probably getting to be a bit too far from what we were originally talking about, but um, I don't know if you want to try and bring it back more towards the topic, Sophie, towards truth and lies and
Yeah.
concealment
Well,
and all that kind of thing.
before we move back onto that, maybe something I say could be useful. So with like prehistoric humans, the problems didn't start arising until the markets and trade and stuff, right? Because doing the trade and the markets and religion and all that, I think that really started divorcing, language and immediate experience into like abstraction, because you have to do a lot of mental calculating to do trade, right? Like we even have computers for it nowadays to do it. So because Hugh even said that like the marketplace and trade is what brewed up the alien cortex and caused all these problems. So um, I think like prehistoric humans before trade really took off and started building civilization, it probably wasn't a huge issue for them until that way of life started overtaking the hunting and the gathering.
Yeah, what you just reminded me of too was the question, and I don't know, I think Hugh might have actually written about this in that article, but I can't remember, was that language makes deceiving people cheap and easy because you just do it with the sound that you make. You don't have to do anything physical. And of course, it's just mentioning like trade in the marketplace where you can see once you're into that realm of counting and calculating and storing and all the rest of it, that there's a lot more possibilities for deception and concealment
Yeah,
also going on there.
yeah, like even think about advertisements, like how are those not
Yeah,
lies? And then
yeah.
let's see what else. Oh yeah, there's this book. I'll put it on my camera and I'll show you this book. I recommend everyone read this. Let me see. So I'll
Mm,
hold this book up here. Against History, Against Leviathan. So it's this book by Freddie
oh, yeah.
Perlman. Um, so one of the things he says in some of the opening chapters in this book is that trade makes people enemies. So back in the
Mm,
like prehistoric ages, like if a group of people had something that another group of people wanted, like a tribe had something that someone from another tribe wanted, they'd meet at a place and they'd have to trade on the spot. They'd go armed people and stuff, and they'd trade and they'd leave. So it was a really antagonistic thing. And so you can even see
mm,
that with commerce, like foreign trade is all about enslaving people. So he
mm,
says straight up, like in like the second chapter of this book, that trade makes enemies out of people, and gifts are what make friends. And then it takes off from there. Yeah, it's really good.
um, yeah, well, I mean, I just thinking of the whole situation with the gas supply to Europe. Um, that this is trade, and it's now being sort of weaponized. Um, uh,
Can
so
I,
it's
can I add something about what we were talking about language the other day with you, Gary? And we talked about the fact of the aspect of connection first. I'd say that's like Hugh wrote that. I think he said that probably language originated in singing, and I think the primal role of language was probably connection, um, just connection. Uh, we had the ability with our vocal cords and the way our larynx is designed um, to make certain sounds, like some other animals make other sounds, and I profoundly think that it started with singing, whether it was mothers singing to their babies or sexual partners singing to each other or any sort of other things. As you say, DB, this got organized and evolved, probably gradually, but probably fantastically fast when trade and agriculture and religion appeared, because you needed for concepts that were alien completely to the primitive, or not so primitive, way of living. You needed to establish something much more complex. But yeah, I was thinking of the importance of the role of connectedness in language, and we need to go back to this role. The other role that you are talking about, Gary, is the conveying of lies and the conveying of truth and the conveying of fake truth and all the things we know about. Anybody wants to elaborate? Because
Yeah, I would like to. First, a comment to what was the first use of language, and getting to the lies later on. I think the lies were pretty early on, but I think in a realistic view of our prehistory, I think that the setting around the campfire is probably the first language arena, or the first arena where you needed language. Maybe as simple as can you pass me the butter, or pass me another piece of meat or something, things that people do every day in their daily lives, and then also like planning the next hunt or fishing trip, or planning the next day, whatever you're going to do as a hunter gatherer. And then I think, as a storyteller myself, as a writer, I think that it moved on to storytelling, like true-ish, like fishing and hunting stories. may have been true in the start, and then maybe they kind of went over to being fantastic and heroic. But that's kind of a benign form of lies, because even today we like fiction, we like exciting stories. But I think that pretty early on, I would expect the lies, the evil lies, to enter the game, because as long as everybody had learned to speak and listen to language, then sort of a proof of concept of what you can achieve by saying something that is not true. Maybe you can get a sexual partner or get more of the food or something just by saying something that isn't true at all. Like, look over there, a squirrel.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, something came to mind is, for instance, when you're writing, I mean, probably I'm not trying to write in that way, but one thing I consistently notice when I do write is that two things. One is that it doesn't, it's not easy to get the writing to capture what is in your mind and get the feeling of it and the sense of it, really. In other words, to get a faithful reproduction of what you're feeling come out in the words. And also the other thing is that almost as soon as you start to write words, they can take on a life of their own, and you end up expressing something that is, it's as though the words begin to dictate what you're saying more than yourself. Even a strange experience. I think Sophie just read out that thing about the dollhouse. And I wrote that, and of course, the only thing I was really paying attention to, and I wrote it, was um, the image in my head. That I was a visual representation, and a feeling about how limiting language was. Um, and then I reread it just to make sure that it made sense, and then sent it. But then it you could see that uh, reading the writing uh, didn't didn't really capture the intensity of what I wanted to say, not from my point of view at any rate. But then, and again, then when it was read back by somebody else, it seemed different again. Um, and so we've got this thing where language is, um, when you're telling a story, it's for instance, just thinking of storytelling around the campfire, that's having a different effect for the people who are hearing it than it is for the person who made up the story or who's telling it. Uh, and the actual story itself is probably different from what the original conception in the person's mind was. Um, So yeah, I guess, sorry, I got off the track. I was just going to ask you, do you think when you write that it captures what's in your head very well, or is it a struggle? I guess that was what my question was.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's a question of practice. Like if you wrote a diary when you were young, or kept sort of expressing yourself in text throughout most of your life, maybe then it's easier, because at least I remember when I was a teenager and wrote a diary, I kind of, even though you don't really have to be as accurate when you write a diary as when you write to other people, because it's only you who's gonna read it anyway. You know, for myself, or for my own challenge, I tried to be very accurate when I wrote a diary, which is a good thing now when I'm over 50 years old, because otherwise I
Yeah,
wouldn't be able to remember what I felt there and then, with my first girlfriend or whatever, right? So
yeah,
I'm happy that I was accurate. But when I write fiction, yeah, it's a very big question. I think we maybe it's a little bit outside the, but it's a question of writing it as soon as you think it, and then taking it, reading it back the day after, and going over it and making better choices in the text in order
yeah,
to make it
yeah,
understandable for other people.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting stuff. I'd like to talk about that some more another time, actually. Um, Certainly going over things again. Um, and the other thing is too, I mean, especially with a thing like a diary, because we seem to have this template for template, this propensity to want to make a story out of everything. Um, I mean, there are people who have contended that stories don't exist, that's something that we impose upon a series of events for whatever reason, possibly to make them easier to remember. If you make a story out of a series of events that aren't very closely connected, it ties them together in such a way that you could probably remember all of the details uh, as part of a story, but you wouldn't remember them as a set of separated facts in a list. Um, uh, but when you look at it, in terms of writing a journal or something like that, um, I certainly reached a stage where I thought to myself, but you know. this is just stuff that happens, and it doesn't necessarily make a story. But and then when I'm writing it like this and read it back, um, uh, do I then try and draw those events together and make a story out of them? You can see it with, uh, especially for people who write biographies and things like that, where they're making a continuity out of the other person's life. Um, and
Gary, you know what comes to my mind when you're saying that is that when you talk about stories, I think stories had a function of healing. And I think that around the fire, our ancestors were probably telling stories to conjure certain elements of fear and other things, even, all sorts of problems occurring, and that the healing power of stories was enormous. Actually, it probably translated into theatre later on. I think there's that guy called Joseph Campbell who wrote, who talked a lot about the power of myth, and I'm not completely fan of the guy. He's just got a wealth of myths and stories, and
yeah, see,
it goes back to the function of stories in the human group. And as Tolkien was saying, around the fire, there was not just give me the meat, or all that sort of thing. There was also, after the day of hunt, or with the planning of the following day, some 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 elements of fear to deal with, and some elements of maybe trauma, and stories were probably fulfilling a role then when they happened. There was also tactical um, elements that were probably shared too, but I think we must not forget that there's a dimension of group healing, whether through singing or stories and using language.
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
I wanted. Go on, DB. It's all right. I'll
um yeah, I think stories can serve that purpose to like um enrichingly wed people to their physical reality. That's possible. I kind of feel like language and stories are a double-edged sword. Um, because people can obviously tell a lie, like the big lie in fascism, or the lie of global industrial civilization. And then yeah, it's like that. I can't remember who said this, but it's like culture is our nature. Like our stories, our customs and stuff kind of dictates and influences how we behave. And I feel like prehistoric humans, their stories and their customs had them more wedded to what was going on around them in their natural environment. And I think that's a big difference.
I heard about there is a concept or a partition in Inuit tradition that you had sort of three roles. You had the hunter who was out on the ice hunting seal and whatever, and then you had the that's called the housewife. just to be to put it simply, the housewife cooking and heating and preparing the stuff. And the third role was the damaged hunter, or the old people, basically people who couldn't be used for either of the other ones, right? And they would take on the role as entertainer or jester or like storyteller, whatever, singer, dancer. Um, and that's, I think it's fascinating because in a very, let's say, a very simple, very small place like Inuit Greenland communities, you sort of get it down to the basics. You have three, not genders, but three roles. All of these have to be filled by somebody. If if the women folk went on strike, everybody would die within a week because everybody needs eating and cooking. And if the hunters didn't do their thing, everybody would also die within a week. And the interesting thing about the jesters or the entertainers, which had hurt an arm or a knee or were just old, is that you can imagine, especially north of the polar circle, Arctic Circle, where it's dark all the time for 6 months or something. You have very long nights, and you have no television, no iPads, no electricity, no artificial light other than the seal oil or the whale oil that we burn. So you have to have the cookers and the hunters, but you also have, equally important, the people who make you simply tolerate existence, and that is the storytellers and the singers and dancers and the people who can entertain you when the day is over and it's still like 6 or 8 hours before you are going to sleep. What are you going to do? Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. Thank you.
I was thinking about
The storytelling and the music and the dancing are very, very important in the language, and the function that you describe is probably the original function of it. And I was talking about the healing of stories. I think that's what I meant around the fire, is that, and the night was coming a long time ago, and wherever in the world the night was dark, and the fears and the dangers were coming out, and the stories and the music and the banging and whatever dancing was going on was also filling that function of healing, protecting, soothing. Yeah.
Sophie, do you remember what Hugh said? I got a feeling back when we were talking about Paul Kingsnorth, I think I made a comment about how he was trying to present a new story for a new time. I wish I could remember what Hugh said. He actually wasn't in agreement. And I don't know if you've got any kind of recollection of that part of our conversation or not.
Oh, was it the one where Hugh talked about how Keensworth said the story has something to do with a guy leaving the village, but then the guy leaving the village and arriving at the village is the same person? Is that the one you mean?
No, it wasn't so much a specific story. I think the point I was trying to make was that Kingsnorth was trying to give us a new myth for a new time. And I think Hugh hit back at the whole idea, but I can't recapture what his reasoning was in doing that.
We can revisit the meetings, because they were in December.
Yeah.
And they're very recent, so you could have a look at those meetings, because he was quite he analyzed Paul quite a lot in a few meetings. There was only about 3 or 4 where he really went deep into his work. I also remember telling you, Gary, not long ago, about Paul Kingsnorth's book called Savage Gods, where, as a writer, he starts to ask himself the question of the validity of words. And it's an essay. It's a short book. It's more than an essay. Yeah, about that, about what we're talking about, basically. He was not yet on the path where we diverged very much. He was struggling. He was struggling with expression. He was struggling with words, and he was calling them savage gods. It's a good little book. I've looked at it again when I talked about it with you. I can't summarize it here, really. You want to read it to see to see the writer, how a writer can suddenly realize that what he's doing is nearly impossible. And maybe that's
Yeah.
where the cracks appeared in Paul. That's when he had, I mean, when he hit that road of religion. I think he went into a kind of a cul-de-sac there as the writer.
Yeah, there's things where words are totally redundant. Like there was in this story I love so much, Black Fox Running, there was a part where a character was grieving over some loss, and they started to talk about it, but then the talk sort of tapered off really quick, and then the author said that they traversed into areas where words were redundant. Because the pain, of that loss was all like the characters are all empathizing with the pain of that loss, and so there's nothing more to say.
Okay. All right. DB, did you want to continue?
Oh no, that was it. Yeah, that was all I
Yeah.
wanted to say.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it was behind my question to Tolstein too about whether the words were capturing things properly. And certainly, I've noticed that if I'm writing, um, because I usually don't allow as much time for it as I would like to, and just in order to escape, and get to bed or something like that, you just tend to go with whatever words you put down, which leads you to the next word you put down, and can very easily find out that these words are starting to say something that isn't quite what you were originally intending. But yeah, there's a couple of things I want to say about what Sophie said and what we said earlier about. I was wondering whether storytelling is also got other purposes, such as making sense out of something, because if you can make a coherent story about something, it can give you the illusion that the whole saga that has been depicted in the story makes some kind of sense, uh, rather than it being meaningless or inexplicable. The story somehow makes it. Uh, uh, it could even make a thing that was unpleasant feel as though it has its place in the universe. The story is a kind of almost like an explanation for why this happened. And I think that's what gets into mythology, where mythologies tend to do more of that, go down that pathway of explaining who did what and why. And that's kind of comforting for people, I guess. Um, and just
Well, have
regarding,
you
go
have you heard of like Joseph Campbell?
oh,
Um,
yeah.
so basic, yeah, so basically, I haven't read his book at all, but I'm familiar a little bit of what his book is. So basically, he uses like Jungian psychology as a template
Mm,
and put out like this diagram called the hero's journey.
yeah.
And basically, the hero's journey is basically a dive of like the personality into the unconscious and then coming back again. And so that's what a lot of the stories are conveying. Like the book I think is called like The Hero with a Thousand Faces.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
right.
that's
Yeah.
like the conscious attention and stuff. So I thought that was I think uh a well-structured story is something like that. I mean, obviously there's probably exceptions, but yeah, it's basically yeah, the hero's journey and coming back changed or with some kind of revelation or realization or insight. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the spiritual journey as well. So it's serving a purpose there for that. yeah, Campbell is. There was. I'm hoping that it's on YouTube. If anyone wants to search for it, it's absolutely brilliant. Which was a series of television interviews between Joseph Campbell and a fellow called Bill Moyers, who I think is probably well known to people in the
I've just
USA.
posted that. I've just posted that, Gary, because
Oh, you have? Good. Great.
I have
Yeah.
actually. They're for. I think they cost about $10, and you've got 8 videos recorded on the site
Yeah.
of Demystification. And I got them years ago, and I didn't actually watch the whole lot, and I'm watching them again now. I've started them again because I think I watched the first few ones.
I can
And
remember they were
it,
they were
I
broadcast on
link.
television
I was
here.
watching episode 5, funny enough, yesterday. So I just posted the link there to that website. It's there's a lot of things. Mm, it's fascinating, but there's a lot of things in Joseph Campbell that irritate me sometimes. But I suppose I don't know what it is. But on the other hand, it's I really like his concepts, and I like his storytelling, and I like the wealth of knowledge he has, and how much he's traveled and collected so many stories from indigenous people, and the thoroughness of his work. So it's well worth listening to that. It's really well worth listening to that. I think it goes back to 1988.
Yeah,
One of
it's
the things. Oh, go ahead, Gary.
Oh dear, I give up. Go on.
We have the opposite problem of last week, because last week there were long periods where nobody would speak, but now we're back to everybody speaking at once. Yeah.
Now everyone's pushing the button.
Yeah.
My turn. My turn.
Can I just connect to what Gary said before everybody forgets that, because
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think Gary touches on something very important about the stories and the narratives. One way they can go down is to end up like Christianity or the Abrahamic religions or other cults, right? So that's kind of a trap or a dangerous way for narratives to go down. But the other way they can go down is like think of a school or a university or a training for different professions, like how to make tools, how to hunt, how to fish, how to which flowers and berries to eat and not. So it's like a sort of one university trail and one religion trail that both came from language and from talking around the campfire, and I don't want to talk too much about current events, but when you have total lack of truth and carpet bombed propaganda during a conflict, like we see today, that is, yeah, I have a huge problem with getting lies 24/7 on all my channels on TV and internet. I have a really big problem with that because I see it as the root cause of the collapse and everything. For most of my life, I thought of collapse as a bad thing. But now that it seems that we are already in collapse, or it's been inevitable for tens or decades. You kind of see there are some silver lining to a collapse, but it's a good thing for the natural world that the civilized world is collapsing, to put it that way. I kind of lost my thread, so I'm just gonna mute before I go further into the long grass.
Yeah, I was going to mention that point about story ending up being religion. But there was also another thing is too that, as I said earlier, because a story links together facts and information and events, making them easier to remember, that this would also have been a very important tool for people before they could write, before you could record things in any other way, is to make a story, have a song that's got information in it. This is a way of passing down, information to each successive generation. But what you're saying there about the situation now, where we've got, so it's such a forceful, dominant narrative that they're trying to drown out every other story with a bigger, louder, more repeated story over and over. Yeah, I did want to say something else, but it might get off the topic. Does anyone else want to carry on with language? Or
Yeah, I was gonna say one more thing. Like one of the things I remember Joseph Campbell saying, because I only watched a couple of short interviews of him, he said that the purpose of our stories is to put the mind in accordance with what the body wants and with what nature
Can you just
wants.
repeat that? I just missed
So
your
I think,
words a sentence back. Would you mind? Yeah.
oh,
It puts the
yeah,
mind
I can do that.
into
Okay,
what? Something?
into accord with what the body wants and with what nature wants.
Okay.
Yeah, like one of my sayings ever since I was like in my mid-20s was like, whatever nature decrees, that is right. I don't even question what nature wants. Whatever nature decrees, that is right.
Did you I only just had a moment before the meeting started, but the text that you quoted on Reddit there, I can't think what the name of it was, but it was poetical, and
Yeah, that's from that book. Yeah,
that's
that's from that book I love.
yeah. But I was thinking, did you see, in a way, poetry is a kind of interface between trying to use very literal language and then trying to express your feelings and impressions. So it's kind of using language in a how would you put it? In a non-literal way. In a it's just sort of using language as paint on a paintbrush rather than you're applying language rather like an artist in comparison to applying language with the point of a pen. It's impressionistic. Um,
Yeah,
so I mean, for
I
someone
think,
who if
uh,
you could, for someone who can really create poetry, um, it escapes a lot of the problems, I think. Um,
yeah, I think the key is to use it in a non-literal way. I mean, obviously we can't do that now in this society, or it'd be impossible to communicate outside of our group. But I think a non-literal type of language that is doing its best to refer immediate to the immediacy of like experience and stuff, like humanity and our physical presence and our environment and stuff. Yeah, because I think the literal minded stuff, that's it can be problematic. Yeah.
mm,
Yeah, that And that story, that story is a lot of that. It's very poetical in how it's written, and it's interesting too because the land itself and all the creatures in it, like the perspective pans around a lot, showing that it's not just about like the fox main character. There's his friends, and then there's these buzzards overhead, and then there's these crows, and then there's these trees and moss, and then crickets. Like the point of view is like it's very, I don't know, I like Taoist, like it's really cool. Like it gives the environment its own character, like the land. Like I feel like the guy who wrote that book really loved and knew the land he lived on. Yeah, those Dartmoor
Well, it
places and
had to be because, you know, I guess an intrinsic part of poetry is infusing it with the feeling that you have at the time. That's what's, you know, you're primarily concerned with recreating the actual experience, I guess. Um, uh, I guess I'm kind of focused on words. So, I mean, when I was reading that, my my dominant response was just how absolutely brilliantly the words were being used. Um, I didn't actually care what it was about. I just was just getting off on the words, you know, on the use of. I thought, wow, this just it just flows. It doesn't put a foot wrong. Um, it, you know, uh, and there was a beauty in the way the words were being used um, that was there as well as what was what he was trying to convey. And I noticed that too. If anyone has got time to listen to that R.D. Lang video, Sophie, did we post that one that starts with the poetry? Is that on? Did we post that on Reddit? Did you put that
Yes,
up? Do you
that
know
one, I posted it a couple of days ago.
the one where he starts off reading the
Starts with a
poem?
poem. Yeah, where he starts with
Yeah,
a poem.
yeah.
That's the one way.
That's also
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Wait,
that's absolutely brilliant. If anyone
yeah,
wants to listen to that, the bit of
yeah,
poetry
yeah.
at the beginning of that video.
yeah,
Yeah.
that poetry is what prompted me to post that excerpt from the book there.
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
listened to the book. That was excellent. About um, the experience of, you know, my experience of you is how did he put it? Uh, that my experience of you is you expressing your experience of me. Um, and then I express back to you, and you perceive me expressing my experience of you, but neither of us can experience um, our the other person's experience. That's always concealed from us. And I think this is, of course, this is the space in which language can come in and misrepresent things because my experience can never be known to another person. It's always personal, um, and therefore you can say something about it, and the other person doesn't know whether you're being authentic or not. So I don't think R.D. Lang actually developed that point, but he certainly made some interesting comments there at that stage, and it was an interesting chapter.
I'm very happy that we're referring to R.D. Lang because his books. I mean, actually, Lord Hugh was extremely fond of him. He mentioned him several times. I know UDB too. You directed me to one of his books that I read and rereading sometimes. Some of them I've got on audiobooks. It's really, I would suggest all the people on this call and the people who might be listening to this conversation to dive into him. He's I've put a link there somewhere up on the comments of a one that I really the name of it is wait a second now. It's the oh God, I have it somewhere else. I can't remember. It Yeah. It's
The Politics of Experience,
yeah,
An Inverted Paradise,
yeah, and
by
it's
R.D. Laing.
I got it now, and it's the chapter 3 of the Politics of Experience, called the Mystification Experience, where he develops what is done to children very young, about the lies and about our society, about conforming children to rules, where they will become obedient little slaves very early in school, and all the other things that we have been talking about for years with the Extinctionati. And it's so well put. He's got this wonderful Scottish accent, but very flowery language that makes it much easier than any other people of the psychiatric profession to listen to, because he's the opposite of boring. He's actually it's exciting to listen to. And yeah, it's on YouTube. It's very easily accessible anyway, and it's got multiple layers of interest for our group.
Yeah, he comes across as very human. You know, he's very likable. Um, it's just you know, you feel as though you like him straight away. Very easy to get into to listening to him.
Well, I believe that he completely tried to dismantle the notion of mental illness, and he totally went against the psychiatric system, and totally identified what we call people with mental health issues, or sick or crazy, as victims of the system and
Yeah,
visionaries. He totally went against the grain of all concepts of psychiatry, and he's a man of the time of the where psychiatry was still extremely aggressive. It still is in different ways, but he introduced a new form of psychotherapy too, that was actually based on basically telling most people that what they needed to look at their experience in a total different light, and not go by the narrative of society, who was confining them as abnormal. He grew up, I believe, in a very harsh Glasgow environment, where people were very poor and just very rough, and he had a very good idea of what civilization was doing to people, and I think that influenced his work a lot.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest disasters modernity has done is I mean, a lot of writers have referred to this, I'm pretty sure, like the demystification of the world, which is just an utter disaster, because that's just basically saying that probably a huge, probably most important aspect of our humanity doesn't exist. And yeah, I feel like the entrenched institutions reinforce that, because they only want people in the marketplace, right? They don't want people outside of the marketplace where there's like no money moving. And so they demystify the world, make it all about getting material things and getting pleasure. And that's just like, and that's shrinking. Like, think about how that shrinks people's like interior worlds and stuff, like the things they think about, the things they experience. Like, it's just, I feel like that whole thing is just a total assault on humanity. The shrinking, the demystification, the trying to invalidate people's like interior experiences. Yeah, I think that's just a disaster. It's terrible.
in the McGilchrist interview, he actually touched upon that too. This sort of bleaching out of life, and specifically, they were talking about the loss of the sacred. You know, that there's no that yeah, there's nothing that's sort of special. special is not a good word. The trouble is that sacred is not a good word either, unless you really go into it, I guess.
Extinctionati number 10. Remember the Extinctionati, Desiderata Extinctionati number 10, where they said that the sacred cannot be spoken about or depicted, you know.
No, and of course it again brings you back to the topic, more or less the topic, which is language and truth and all the rest of it. Is when we make the attempt to capture things like that, you become aware that you're participating in a misrepresentation, and so you're trying to say something that can't be said, hoping that what you say paints a bit of a picture in somebody else's mind, gets them pointed in the direction that you're thinking of, and then maybe they can feel it for themselves, but you can't sort of literally give it any precise way. So yeah, I mean, this is where you reach the limits of language. And just thinking back to Wittgenstein, because there was a famous quote of his, which I'm probably going to get wrong, about where he says, whereof, somebody probably Google it for me, I can't do it. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent. In other words, if you can't capture it, just shut up. At least have the good grace to shut up. If you know you can't, capture it, the silence is probably better than misrepresenting what it is that you're trying to indicate. But yeah, McGilchrist did cover that specifically. Lost the sort of making the world rather bland. And it goes with the general dumbing down and conformity, and and again coming back to the alien cortex, because it's you make everything uniform, therefore it's predictable, and therefore it can be quantified and managed and digitized and controlled, and it sort of fits in with the entire the whole agenda of authority and control. Sort of fits together nicely once you start to take the magic out of the world. And I think that comes back to what we were talking about with Hugh, which was reintroducing magic. Of course, magic is got various senses of the word, but reintroducing magic and enchantment, I guess, is probably a good word there. Reintroducing a sense of wonder at what we see. Sure, I mean,
Yeah.
the sun gets up, and we all know that the solar system is like this, and this is going around that, and all the rest of it. But the fact is that's not what your experience is. The fact is that you stand there and this thing is going up in the sky, and you're perfectly still, and it's just amazing. And whether or not it's a whole pile of burning hydrogen or not is beside the point, because that just doesn't really capture the exquisiteness of this thing at all. And this is where science is just sort of double-edged sword, where it explains a lot of things and de-enchants them at the same time. Did you want to say something there, Debbie?
Yeah, a good example of that is I'll use birds as an example. Like if you open up like a science textbook in a school and read about birds, it's it's interesting information about them, but it's also really dry and kind of sterile. But if you read a poem that someone wrote about a bird who loves birds, it's incredible. It takes you for a ride. or just go listen to birdsong, which is even better, and then think about how that makes you feel, or feel it in the moment.
Yeah, you reminded me of a bit in the R.D. Laing talk where he talks about science, and he says, if I want to understand my dog, and I dissect it and cut it all up and try to measure all the responses and all the rest of it, and sort of explain my dog in bits and pieces. Um, he said it's a very disappointing exercise. If I really want to understand the dog, I've got to have the entire thing alive and operating, and behold it as a complete functioning item, not as a fragmented, divided up thing. That the parts, these dead parts, don't add up to what you get if you just leave it alone and enjoy it.
Yeah, and I feel like empathy is a big part of that. Like, I mean, I went to volunteer at a wolf sanctuary for 2 months, and if I reflect on my experience with that, like, basically, like, to understand like a wolf, you have to come downstairs from the alien cortex and the other brain layers, and then you can understand them perfectly. They'll tell you perfectly what their moods are and what they want and what they don't want. It is. I love how Going South linked language older than words. Well, I think that's the language older than words. Like, I remember Hugh talked about how people can understand what it's like to be a lion because we do sort of have that mammalian brain structure, and lions, I think, are mammalian and like reptile and fish brain in the form of a cat. So and then you can see that all the time. Like people keep those animals in like sanctuaries and stuff, and they get along with them and figure out what they want. So yeah, I think empathy is a big factor, and sadly, empathy is really in short supply in this society.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is. Again, it could be a double-edged sword, though. If you're empathetic in the kind of connected up world that we're living in, you are going to get severely bombarded and overloaded because, you take just even what we've got now, you've got a myriad problems in the world, and you turn on your computer and you're getting all of this. You've got a war here and all this kind of stuff, and then you've got some jerk in the United Kingdom wants to send refugees to some hellhole in Africa, and then you've got, what was the other thing about the blood batteries, the cost of cobalt and lithium mining, and all this human suffering everywhere, and so we've got a, a kind of an environment that is tending to destroy empathetic people, punish them in a way for being empathetic. You get this kind of aversion therapy going on, that kind of selects in a way for the non-empathetic because they're not getting overloaded. They're fine. It doesn't stress them out that much about other people's deaths in other people's countries. They're not identifying with it, and so I guess there's an issue there.
Yeah, it's probably, I don't know how to describe how to deal with that. That's really hard. Yeah, it's like, probably for the empathetic, it's not wise to leave like the signal completely open, like leave the channel open all the way. Maybe put a little bit of shielding on there so you don't get overloaded and like break down in tears. Because yeah, I totally know what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, but I think Torstein made a very good remark in the last meeting when you were talking about collapse, because I think I wasn't there. And he said that when collapse will happen, we won't be subjected to all this because our connections through internet and all sorts of other media will shrink our world to our immediate environment, which will be within walking distance or maybe, horse distance or whatever will happen. So I think it's showing us that it's showing us again that the absurdity of living in a world where there is so much information and connection. Our body and our mind are not, our brain are not able to cope with the immensity of that. And it's no point in trying to say, well, I'm going to shut down my empathy for this and that, because we can't do this. We can only do it in an experience where we experience a small amount of information, a small amount of things coming through our senses, eyes, ears, and smells and everything. So when we get this this thing of information, news about people dying miles and thousands of miles away, and war, we can't cope with this, whether you're a very empathetic person or you're too sensitive or not. It's still an overload. So again, we have to go with the flow. I think collapse is showing us the way to get to a more sensible, manageable size of world, well, yeah, that's what I feel anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a sense in which collapse is absolutely the appropriate thing. But I mean, there's a tendency to couch it in terms of the fact that this is an aberration that we could and should and ought to do something to stop. But it could be a perfectly, how could you put it? I don't want to use the word natural. It could be that the time has come for this, because I guess a bit like what McGilchrist was saying, pushing the thing too far in a certain direction, that it's finally reached a stage where it's completely negating itself and is now, instead of going ahead, it's now undoing itself. And that might be the only way to restore some sanity, I guess. If there's anyone around.
The space time and mental space time is curved.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of that, and it's also that at another level, what they call, I think it's called the horseshoe in politics, where the right and the left hang so far out in their ideas that they end up actually agreeing with each other on certain points. Is another way of looking at that.
Oh, I always wanted to talk to Hugh about that horseshoe theory, but I kind of want to put forward my own idea of the political. So I think that political compass is kind of BS. So I kind of view it like this. Human societies are like a spectrum. In one side of the spectrum, you have completely free hunter-gatherers. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have total technological fascism. And I think we all know which one we're in. Because because if you look at the structure of Stalinist state and Hitler's, it's the same hierarchy. The only difference is they've dressed up. They have the Russian cultural ornaments on the Stalinist hierarchy, and then they have like the German and Aryan ornaments on the Hitler hierarchy.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's the same structure. It's the state, the pyramid structure. So, yeah, like that book I showed you guys, Against History, Freddie Perlman straight up says that in the first chapter of the book, that some people have speculated after World War II that the fascism was defeated, but some say that their social order won, and so everyone else adopted it.
Yeah, but you can see there too, you know, that with Stalin and Hitler, you know, that you could say, well, one was fascism and one was communism, which, you know, would normally be at opposite ends of the spectrum, but they were both amounting to the same thing in terms of their practical effect on people in those societies.
Yeah,
But
I'm not too sure
there's a lot to be
exactly,
said
like,
about
if
this.
whether. Yeah, all I was gonna say is, like, I'm not sure what they were going for with communism in Russia, but if they were going for a stateless, classless, moneyless society, yeah, there's only one of those. That's hunter-gatherers.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking more about, you know, how frequently the word democracy is thrown around, and you know, especially listen to people like Russell Brand, and he says, you know, if we live in a true democracy, then therefore this, and this should happen, shouldn't happen, and all the rest of it. And he does it, and a lot of other people do it, and say, in a democracy, we don't do this. You know, in terms of referring to all the authoritarianism that's breaking out everywhere, that this is anti-democratic. Um, but, you know, I question whether we've ever had a democracy anywhere. Um, that we've been told there's this thing called democracy that we're living in, but then when you go looking for it, you find a lot of evidence for behaviour that doesn't fit what a democracy is supposed to be. And then if you go all the way back to the invention of it, the original inventors of it, in like in Greece, in ancient Greece, they they didn't have what we would call a democracy there either. Uh, um, and then we think, well, what is a democracy? Because it appears that there never actually been one, in other than a name that people have used. Uh, and that's why I'm just coming back full circle to what you're saying about the hunter-gatherer group. Is that, yeah? That's, I think that's where you find your democracy, where everyone's got a say, and the group is small enough that, you know, you don't need a hierarchy, this sort of authority and delegation of um, of you know, delegation of authority, and being represented by somebody else. You represent yourself directly, and so yeah, the democracy is way back there somewhere. If you want to still
Yeah,
use the word democracy, you know.
it's yeah, it's preventing the separation into classes like worker class, intelligentsia. Like
Mm,
when that separation starts happening in your society, that's when things start going to shit really quickly. Maybe even before that, maybe when people get settled. I don't know exactly. I don't know a lot of prehistoric history, but it seems to me that,
no.
yeah, once you get to where people are starting to get divided into specialized roles, that's when things turn to shit.
I think
Yeah, and I think,
there's
yeah,
no such
go on,
thing.
sorry.
I don't see why democracy should be a goal. I don't think it's never worked and it's never going to be right. I mean, from a very anarchist point of view, I think we are not we shouldn't go in that direction at all. Everything democracy is generated from a kind of alien cortex. I was going to say type of reasoning that. You know, it completely negates the role of each person in the community. It's thought of at a big scale, which is totally uncontrollable and brings on chaos. So I think the debate on democracy is a waste of time, really. I mean, it's another lie. It's another word that's empty of sense, because when you go to the root of it, it doesn't make any sense. That's
Well, yeah, I think you're right. Democracy seems to just be the word the people in power use as like the good word. So when they say democracy, people are supposed to feel good, and oh, when democracy is threatened, it's supposed to feel. It's just a word that's had its meaning destroyed by the power structure itself. I feel like. I'm not sure how it worked like in Nazi Germany or in like communist Russia, but maybe the communists or the like Leninists or the Stalinists was like the same as democracy. They say communism, they just think, oh, that's good, or at least the people that were supporting it. And then in America they say democracy, and then oh, that's the good word. But when you try to actually like figure out what it means, like it's a disaster because I feel like the word was destroyed by the power structure.
Yeah, democracy means the in Greek the origin of democracy is the ruling by the demos, by the people. But that was in Athens, where there was well, it was already a big population when that happened. You saw the results. It ended up in shambles and wars and the ruling of the oligarchs too at the time. I strongly believe that it's another word. It's another word that replaces a sort of that has a religious feel to it, and that it's a trap. It reeks of consensus and numbers, things like that, and it's bringing us on a fool's errand, and instead of going back to base to um, the basic thing is the group, mutual aid and no structure, um, you know,
Yeah,
but from the bottom up, I think.
yeah, it's anarchy. I mean, hunter-gatherers back in their and the Stone Age didn't have that word, but we in um the modern age civilization, looking back, we know that's anarchy. The state they were living in. Yeah.
Well, that could be a subject for maybe another meeting that we could talk about.
Yeah, we could probably develop that a lot.
Very
Yeah,
big subject, and I'm personally getting a little bit tired.
yeah,
I have
it's
a dog.
almost 2 hours. So
The
yeah,
dog wants
Oh
us down.
wow.
2 hours,
Um,
yeah, wow, yeah.
there is one more thing. Can I read this short little paragraph? Because we were talking about already laying in the mental illness, and in Against History, there's this little paragraph that I think really describes this culture. So let's see, it's right here. Um, the frenzied rush away from oneself is the exact opposite of what happened in communities of free human beings. In such communities, the goal was to realize oneself, to become everything one could be, and to insert the fully developed self into a meaningful cosmic context. Communities which gave individuals such meaningful context had or were cultures. So he was talking about how hunter-gatherers saw themselves, and then there's a bunch before that literally tearing apart the idea of civilization being a culture. So yeah, I thought that was really
mm,
good
yeah,
because we have no cosmic context in this culture at all. There's nothing.
yeah,
There's no ground beneath our feet. Everyone like if you talk to people, you find out like everyone's living in their own little world, so to speak, with a few commonality to navigate the system. Yeah, it's really sad.
no, that's a good thing to finish up with, I guess. Just to ponder that. Will we pack up now because Sophie will probably have to restart the recording soon anyway. Um, so will we do a just
Shall we fall silent?
yeah, I don't know. We just have a half a minute silence perhaps and then end it if you like. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so all right. Well, thanks everybody. That was that was pretty good meeting actually.
Yeah. Very
All
cool.
right.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you
Yeah.
so
Bye.
Yeah,
much. Bye.
it's
Thanks,
good to see
Denise.
you all again.